Buckingham Palace has said King Charles spent a short period of time in hospital today.
Behind palace walls, a quiet but shocking decision has just been made. New leaked documents suggest King Charles has secretly removed Prince Harry from his royal will. This does not just include Charles' finances but also properties and some of Diana's jewelries. After years of family tension, public interviews, and painful betrayals, King Charles has finally chosen a side, and it's not Harry's side. Why now? What finally pushed Charles to act? And what does this mean for Harry's future and the monarchy itself? This revelation could change everything you thought you knew. The leaked document that shocked the world. The mistake happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in late October, when a junior legal clerk was working in the prestigious London law firm that handled King Charles's private legal affairs. She had been asked to send updated estate planning documents to the King's private secretary for review. She typed what she thought was the correct email address into her computer and attached the confidential files without double-checking the recipient information. Within seconds, she realized her terrible mistake. The documents had been sent not to the palace but to an email address that belonged to someone outside the royal household entirely. She felt panic rising in her chest as she understood what she had done. The documents she had just sent contained extremely sensitive information about King Charles's personal finances and his plans for distributing his wealth after his death. These were exactly the kind of confidential materials that should never leave the law firm except through the most secure channels. She immediately reported her error to her supervisor, hoping that somehow the damage could be contained before anyone actually read the documents or understood their significance. But it was already too late. The person who received the misdirected email was a businessman named David Thornton who had worked with the royal household on property matters several years earlier. His email address was similar to the one belonging to the King's current private secretary, which explained how she had made her mistake. When David opened the email and saw the attached documents, he immediately recognized that he was looking at something he was not supposed to see. The first page clearly identified the materials as King Charles's last will and testament, updated and executed just 3 weeks earlier. David knew he should probably delete the documents and inform the palace that he had received them by mistake. But curiosity got the better of him, and he began reading through the will to see what it contained. What he discovered shocked him so much that he read through the documents 3 times to make sure he was understanding correctly. According to the will, Prince Harry had been completely removed as a beneficiary. Every asset, property, and financial holding that would normally have been split between William and Harry was now designated to go entirely to William and his children. Harry's name appeared nowhere in the document except in a brief clause that specifically stated he was being excluded from any inheritance. David sat at his desk for a long time thinking about what to do with this information. He knew that if he kept quiet and deleted the documents, no one would ever know that he had seen them. But he also knew that this information was explosive and newsworthy. The public had a right to know that King Charles had cut his own son out of his will, especially given all the controversy surrounding Harry's departure from royal duties and his public criticisms of the family. After struggling with his conscience for several hours, David made a decision that would change everything. He forwarded the documents to a journalist he knew who covered royal affairs for a major British newspaper. The journalist could hardly believe what she was reading when she opened David's email. She had been covering the royal family for 15 years and had reported on countless scandals and controversies, but this was unprecedented. A reigning monarch cutting his own son completely out of his will was the kind of story that happened in medieval times, not in the modern era. She immediately verified that the documents appeared to be authentic by checking various details against what she knew about royal legal matters and by consulting with legal experts who confirmed that the format and language were consistent with legitimate estate planning documents. She contacted the palace to give them an opportunity to comment before she published the story. The palace press office was thrown into chaos when they learned about the leak. They immediately confirmed that the documents were genuine and begged the journalist not to publish the story, arguing that it involved private family matters that should not be made public. but she explained that the removal of a prince from the royal will was a matter of significant public interest and that her newspaper intended to run the story. The palace had only a few hours to prepare for the firestorm that would follow. Harry's reaction to the devastating news. Prince Harry was sitting in his home office in Montecito, California, reviewing scripts for a documentary project he was working on when his phone started ringing repeatedly with calls from friends and former colleagues in Britain. At first, he ignored the calls because he was trying to concentrate on his work. But when Meghan came into his office looking worried and told him that people were trying to reach them urgently about something involving his father, Harry felt a sense of dread settle over him. He picked up his phone and saw dozens of missed calls and text messages. The messages all said variations of the same thing. "Have you seen the news? Are you okay? We are so sorry to hear what happened." Harry had no idea what everyone was talking about. He opened a news website on his computer and immediately saw the headline about being removed from his father's will. For a moment, Harry just stared at the screen in disbelief, certain that this must be fake news or some kind of misunderstanding. But as Harry read through the article and saw images of the leaked will documents, he realized with growing horror that the story was real. His father had actually cut him completely out of his inheritance. Harry felt like he had been punched in the stomach. The emotional pain was physical and overwhelming. He pushed back from his desk and stood up, trying to process what he was feeling. Shock, hurt, betrayal, and rage all mixed together until Harry thought he might be sick. Meghan came over and put her arms around Harry as he struggled to control his emotions. She had been reading the same news reports on her own phone and understood immediately how devastating this must be for her husband. Meghan felt her own anger rising at how Charles had handled this. Even if the king had decided to remove Harry from his will, doing it quietly without any family discussion and then having Harry find out through a leaked document reported in the media was cruel and cowardly. Harry deserved better treatment than this from his own father. Harry's first instinct was to call Charles directly and demand an explanation. He picked up his phone and dialed his father's private number, the one that only family members had access to. The phone rang several times and then went to voicemail. Harry left an emotional message asking his father to call him back immediately so they could discuss what had happened. He said that finding out this way was humiliating and hurtful, and that Charles owed him at least a conversation about why he had made this decision. Hours passed with no response from Charles. Harry called again and again, leaving increasingly angry messages. He sent text messages that went unanswered. He tried calling the palace switchboard and asking to be put through to his father, but he was told that the king was unavailable and could not take his call. Harry realized that Charles was deliberately refusing to speak with him and that this silence was itself a message about how completely his father had given up on their relationship. Unable to reach his father directly, Harry tried calling William to see if his brother knew anything about this situation. William also did not answer his phone. Harry left a message asking William to call him back, but he had little hope that William would respond. The relationship between the brothers had been broken for years, with William taking the family's side in all the conflicts and cutting Harry out of his life almost completely. Harry suspected that William had probably encouraged Charles to remove him from the will. As the day wore on and Harry received no responses from anyone in his family, he made the decision to release a public statement through his spokesperson. The statement was emotional and direct. Harry said that he had learned about being removed from his father's will through media reports rather than through any communication from his family. He expressed deep hurt at his father's decision and at the way it had been handled. He said that this action showed how completely the royal family was willing to reject and punish family members who chose to live their lives differently from what the institution demanded. The statement went on to question what message Charles was sending by cutting off his own son so completely. Harry pointed out that he was still Charles's child and the father of Charles's grandchildren. He said that using inheritance as a weapon to punish family members for speaking honestly about their experiences was cruel and vindictive. Harry's statement concluded by saying that while he was hurt and disappointed, He was not surprised by this latest rejection from a family that had shown him repeatedly that their loyalty was to the institution rather than to the people who were supposed to matter most. Meghan supported Harry through this difficult time, but she also felt frustrated and angry on his behalf. She had watched her husband try repeatedly over the years to maintain some relationship with his father and his brother, despite all the hurt and rejection he had experienced. Meghan had encouraged Harry to keep trying to build bridges with his family, but this latest development made her question whether reconciliation was even possible or desirable. She told Harry that perhaps it was time to accept that Charles and William had made their choice and to focus on building their own life separate from the toxic dynamics of the royal family. Harry spent days feeling depressed and struggling with complicated emotions about his father's decision. Part of him was genuinely hurt and grieving the loss of what little connection remained between him and Charles. But another part of him felt relief that the pretense was finally over, and that the truth about how his family viewed him was now completely clear. Harry told Meghan that at least now he knew exactly where he stood and could stop hoping that things might somehow improve, or that his family might eventually accept him back on his own terms. The years of conflict that led to this moment. The decision to remove Harry from the will had not been made impulsively or in a moment of anger. It was the culmination of years of increasing tensions and conflicts between Harry and his father that had gradually eroded whatever love and connection had once existed between them. The problems had really begun when Harry met Meghan and decided that she was the woman he wanted to marry. Charles had initial reservations about Meghan based partly on concerns about how the public and the media would react to Harry marrying an American actress. Charles had tried to be supportive when Harry announced his engagement to Meghan, but the relationship between father and son became strained during the wedding planning process. Charles felt that Harry and Meghan were making decisions that prioritized their personal preferences over royal protocol and tradition. He was uncomfortable with how much attention and drama surrounded the wedding. Charles also heard complaints from palace staff about Meghan's demanding behavior and her apparent difficulty adjusting to royal expectations, and these reports created doubts in his mind about whether this marriage was a good idea. The real break between Charles and Harry came when the young couple decided to step back from royal duties and move to North America. Charles felt blindsided by this decision because Harry had not discussed it with him in advance before making a public announcement. Charles interpreted Harry's departure as a rejection of everything the royal family stood for and as an abandonment of duty and responsibility. He was embarrassed by the international attention and criticism that followed Harry and Meghan's exit from royal life. Charles tried to maintain some relationship with Harry even after the move to America, but each new public revelation made reconciliation more difficult. When Harry and Meghan gave their interview to Oprah Winfrey, where they made accusations about racism within the royal family and about being denied help when Meghan felt suicidal, Charles was devastated and furious. He felt that Harry had betrayed the family's trust by discussing private matters publicly and by making accusations that Charles believed were either false or grossly exaggerated. The interview damaged the monarchy's reputation and created an international scandal. The publication of Harry's memoir was another major blow to the relationship between father and son. Charles had begged Harry not to publish the book, warning that revealing private family conversations and conflicts would cause permanent damage. But Harry went ahead anyway, apparently prioritizing the money he would earn from the book deal over his father's feelings and the family's privacy. When Charles read the memoir and saw how Harry had portrayed him as a distant and unsympathetic father, he felt hurt and angry. He believed that Harry's version of events was one-sided and unfair. Each interview that Harry gave where he criticized Charles or the monarchy pushed the wedge deeper between them. Charles felt that Harry was building a career and making money by exploiting his royal status and by trash-talking his family. He resented being used as material for Harry's various media projects and entertainment deals. Charles told close advisors that he felt like Harry saw him not as a father but as a source of grievances that could be monetized through books, interviews, and documentaries. William played a significant role in hardening Charles's attitude toward Harry. The brothers had been close when they were younger, united by their shared grief over Diana's death and by their understanding of the unique pressures of royal life. But William felt that Harry had betrayed him personally by leaving the royal family and then attacking the institution that William would someday lead. William was particularly angry about how Harry and Meghan had used Diana's memory in their public statements, suggesting that Diana would have supported their choices and would have been disappointed in how the family treated them. William told Charles repeatedly that Harry should face real consequences for his actions rather than being allowed to have things both ways. William argued that Harry wanted to enjoy the benefits of being a prince while rejecting the responsibilities, and that this arrangement was unfair and untenable. He pushed his father to take a harder line with Harry and to stop making accommodations or offering compromises that Harry would just reject anyway. William believed that cutting Harry off financially and removing him from the line of inheritance would send a clear message about the price of disloyalty. Charles had resisted William's arguments for a long time because of his emotional attachment to Harry and his hope that somehow the relationship could be repaired. But as the years passed and Harry continued to make money from criticizing the family while refusing to reconcile or to stop his public attacks, Charles gradually came to agree with William's position. He realized that maintaining Harry in his will was giving his younger son a safety net that allowed him to continue attacking the family without facing real consequences. The final straw came when Harry gave yet another interview where he criticized Charles's parenting and suggested that the king had been a poor father who had emotionally neglected his sons. Charles read the interview and felt something break inside him. He had tried for years to maintain some connection with Harry despite everything, but he was exhausted from being used as a target for Harry's anger and resentment. Charles decided that if Harry wanted to reject him as a father and to build a life completely separate from the royal family, then Harry should experience what that separation really meant, including being cut off from any claim to royal wealth. Charles called his solicitors and instructed them to prepare a revised will that removed Harry entirely as a beneficiary. The lawyers advised Charles to think carefully about this decision because it would be difficult to reverse once made public. But Charles was firm in his instructions. He had made his decision, and he wanted it implemented immediately. Within weeks, the new will was drafted, reviewed, and executed. Harry was now completely excluded from any inheritance from his father, with all assets redirected to William and William's children. But what role did William play in this huge decision? William's role in convincing Charles. Prince William had spent years urging his father to take a firmer stance on Prince Harry, arguing that repeated public attacks on the royal family could not go unanswered. William's frustration began when Harry announced his decision to step back from royal duties and grew with every interview, documentary, and memoir that painted the family negatively. He felt deeply betrayed, convinced Harry had chosen wealth and celebrity over loyalty, duty, and responsibility. As children and young adults, William and Harry had been inseparable. They leaned on each other after their mother's death and worked side by side on charitable causes, presenting themselves as a modern, united generation of royals. That bond, however, collapsed once Harry met Meghan and began making choices William believed were reckless and damaging to the monarchy they were born to serve. From the start, William harbored doubts about Meghan. He worried about the speed of the relationship and whether she truly understood the lifelong demands of royal life. William advised Harry to slow down and reflect, but Harry saw this as hostility and interference. Arguments followed, even before the engagement, planting the seeds of a rift that never healed. Harry and Meghan's decision to leave royal duties and relocate to America left William furious. He had expected to shoulder royal responsibilities alongside his brother, supporting their father and preparing for the future. Instead, William felt abandoned, forced to carry an increased workload alone, while Harry publicly portrayed himself as a victim of circumstances he had chosen. The Oprah interview marked a breaking point. William was outraged by accusations of racism, believing the implications unfairly targeted him and Catherine. He felt Harry had ignited a public scandal and walked away from the fallout, prompting William to publicly deny the claims. an unusual and deeply personal response. Privately, William pressed Charles to impose real consequences. He questioned why Harry should remain in the line of succession and retain inheritance rights while profiting from royal status and exposing private family matters. Charles resisted at first, unwilling to punish his son, but William reframed the issue as accountability, not revenge. William also raised concerns for his own children, asking whether it was fair for them to watch their uncle attack the family while still benefiting from its wealth. His most compelling argument, however, focused on precedent. Allowing Harry to enjoy privileges without duties, William warned, would undermine the monarchy's integrity for future generations. The final turning point came when Harry revealed details from a private conversation with Charles. Trust shattered, Charles revised his will, removing Harry entirely. William supported the decision, convinced history would see it as a necessary stand for loyalty, duty, and the survival of the monarchy. But what does Harry stand to lose, and how will it affect him? The money Harry would lose. The leaked will documents provided unprecedented insight into the enormous wealth that Prince Harry stood to lose by being removed as a beneficiary from his father's estate. Royal finances had always been shrouded in secrecy, with the public knowing only general estimates of the family's wealth rather than specific details about who owned what and how assets would be distributed after death. The leaked documents pulled back the curtain on this secretive world and revealed the staggering amounts of money and property that Charles controlled. According to the will documents, Charles's personal estate was valued at approximately £300 million, though some experts suggested the actual value could be significantly higher depending on how certain assets were appraised. This figure did not include property and wealth that belonged to the crown or to various royal trusts and could not be personally bequeathed by Charles. But it did include Charles's private investments, his personal property holdings, his extensive art and jewelry collections, and various other assets that he had accumulated through inheritance and through his own financial management over decades. Under the previous version of Charles's will, which had been executed shortly after he became king, Harry had been designated to receive approximately 1/3 of the estate, with William receiving the remaining 2/3, to reflect his position as heir to the throne. This arrangement would have given Harry somewhere around £100 million plus significant items of personal property, including artwork, jewelry, and other valuables that had sentimental as well as monetary value. Harry would also have inherited several properties that Charles owned personally rather than as part of the crown estate. The revised will completely eliminated Harry's share and redirected everything to William and William's children. The document specified that William would inherit the bulk of the estate directly, with certain amounts set aside in trust for George, Charlotte, and Louis. The will made explicit that Harry was being deliberately excluded rather than accidentally omitted, including language that stated clearly that Prince Henry Charles Albert David, Harry's full legal name, was not to receive any portion of the estate under any circumstances. Beyond the direct monetary loss, Harry was also losing access to various properties that would have been extremely valuable both financially and personally. Charles owned several private residences that were not part of the official royal properties and that he could bequeath to his heirs. These included a country estate in Wales, a cottage in Scotland, and several investment properties in London. Harry had apparently been promised the Welsh estate in previous discussions with Charles, as it was a place where Harry had spent happy times as a child. Losing this property would mean losing not just the financial value but also the connection to positive memories. The art and jewelry collections that Charles had accumulated were worth tens of millions of pounds and included pieces that had been in the family for generations. Harry would have inherited certain items that had personal significance, including some pieces that had belonged to Princess Diana and that Charles had been holding for his sons. The revised will specified that all these items would now go to William, meaning that Harry would lose access even to things that had connections to his mother. Financial experts calculated that by being removed from the will, Harry was losing between £100 million and £150 million in total value when all assets were considered. This represented an enormous amount of wealth that would have provided financial security for Harry, his children, and his grandchildren for generations to come. The inheritance would have allowed Harry to maintain a lifestyle similar to what he had known growing up without having to worry about earning money or building his own wealth through commercial ventures. The loss was particularly significant given Harry's current financial situation. While Harry and Meghan had signed lucrative deals with Netflix and Spotify and had earned money from Harry's memoir, these income sources were not guaranteed to continue indefinitely. Entertainment contracts eventually expired and needed to be renegotiated. Book sales would decline over time. Harry's ability to continue earning large amounts of money depended on maintaining public interest in his story and his royal connections, which might fade as years passed and as public attention moved to other topics. Without the inheritance from Charles, Harry would need to maintain his earning capacity for the rest of his life, rather than being able to rely on investment income from inherited wealth. This created pressure for Harry to continue doing interviews, writing books, and producing content about his royal experiences, even if he might prefer to move on from those topics. The financial reality of being cut off from royal wealth meant that Harry would likely have to continue exploiting his royal status in exactly the ways that had caused Charles to remove him from the will in the first place. Some financial analysts pointed out that Harry might still inherit money from other sources, including trusts that had been established by Queen Elizabeth or by other family members. But these amounts would be much smaller than what Harry would have received from Charles's estate, and there was no guarantee that those other sources would not also be revised to exclude Harry if the family's position toward him remained hostile. The loss of Charles's inheritance represented the most significant financial consequence Harry had faced from his decision to leave royal life and to publicly criticize his family. The legal battle Harry cannot win. As news of Harry's removal from Charles's will spread and the full financial implications became clear, legal experts began analyzing whether Harry had any grounds to challenge his father's decision or to force Charles to restore him as a beneficiary. The consensus among lawyers was that Harry's legal options were extremely limited and that any attempt to challenge the will would almost certainly fail. British inheritance law strongly favored testamentary freedom, meaning that people had the right to distribute their estates however they chose without being required to leave anything to their children. Unlike some countries that had forced heirship rules requiring parents to leave certain portions of their estates to their children, British law imposed no such requirements on testators. Charles could legally choose to leave his entire estate to charity, to friends, to distant relatives, or to anyone else he preferred, rather than to his own sons. The law recognized that parents might have good reasons for disinheriting children and did not allow courts to override those decisions except in very limited circumstances. The main legal doctrine that might have allowed a child to challenge exclusion from a parent's will was the Inheritance Provision for Family and Dependents, Act 1975. This law allowed certain family members to petition the court for reasonable financial provision from an estate if they believed they had been unfairly excluded. However, legal experts explained that this law was primarily designed to protect people who had been financially dependent on the deceased and who would face hardship without inheritance. The law was not intended to simply redistribute wealth according to what courts thought was fair. For Harry to have any chance of succeeding under this law, he would need to demonstrate that he was dependent on Charles for financial support, and that being excluded from the will would cause him genuine hardship. But Harry's situation did not fit this requirement. He was a wealthy adult with substantial income from his entertainment deals and his book sales. He owned expensive property in California and lived a comfortable lifestyle. Courts would be extremely unlikely to find that someone in Harry's financial position deserved forced provision from his father's estate. Some lawyers suggested that Harry might try to argue that Charles had been unduly influenced by William or by palace advisors to remove him from the will. Undue influence was one of the few grounds that could potentially void all or part of a will if it could be proven that the testator's decisions were not truly their own, but rather were the result of pressure or manipulation by others. But proving undue influence was extremely difficult, and required showing more than just that someone had given advice or expressed opinions to the testator. To succeed on an undue influence claim, Harry would need to prove that Charles lacked the mental capacity to resist pressure from William or others, and that his decision to revise the will was not based on his own judgment but rather on coercion or manipulation that overpowered his will. Given that Charles was clearly mentally competent and had made the decision to revise his will after years of conflict with Harry, this argument would be nearly impossible to prove. Courts would likely find that Charles had made a considered decision based on his own assessment of Harry's behavior and loyalty. Another potential argument would be that Charles lacked testamentary capacity when he executed the revised will, meaning that he did not have the mental ability to understand what he was doing. But this argument was even less plausible than the undue influence claim. Charles was in his 70s but was clearly still mentally sharp and capable of managing his affairs. He was serving as king and performing complex duties that required good judgment and clear thinking. No court would find that someone capable of being monarch lacked the mental capacity to make decisions about his own will. Legal experts also pointed out that even if Harry somehow succeeded in challenging the will, the most he could hope for would be reasonable financial provision, which would likely be far less than the full inheritance he would have received under the previous version of the will. Courts would consider Harry's existing wealth and earning capacity when determining what amount would be reasonable. Given that Harry was already wealthy by any normal standard, a court might conclude that he needed very little or even nothing from Charles's estate to live comfortably. The practical reality was that bringing a legal challenge would also create terrible publicity for Harry and would make his relationship with the royal family even worse if that was possible. Fighting in court over his father's will would reinforce the perception that Harry cared more about money than about family relationships. It would generate negative headlines and would make Harry look greedy and entitled. The legal battle would play out in public with all the details of Harry's finances and the family's conflicts being aired in court documents and testimony. Harry's lawyers undoubtedly advised him that he had essentially no chance of winning a legal challenge and that attempting one would only make his situation worse. The British legal system strongly protected the right of people to distribute their estates according to their own wishes, and Charles had clearly exercised that right in a way that was legally unassailable, even if it was emotionally devastating to Harry. The only realistic path forward for Harry was to accept that his father had made this decision and to adjust his own financial planning accordingly. The finality of Harry's legal position meant that he had no leverage to force reconciliation with Charles. In the past, Harry might have thought that Charles would eventually soften his position because of their family relationship, or because Charles would not want to be seen as abandoning his son. But removing Harry from the will sent an unmistakable message that Charles had made a permanent decision, and that no amount of waiting or hoping would change the outcome. Harry was truly cut off from his royal inheritance with no legal recourse available to him. This decision did not just alter the course of Harry's future, it also shattered every hope of reconciliation between Harry and the royal family. The permanent rift and uncertain future. The public revelation that Prince Harry had been removed from King Charles's will marked a decisive and painful turning point in their fractured relationship. Once the leaked documents became known, any remaining hope that time, distance, or quiet conversations might lead to reconciliation quickly vanished. Palace statements made it clear that the decision was final, while Harry's angry public reaction ensured there would be no private path back. What might once have been healed behind closed doors was now permanently broken in public view. According to palace insiders, Charles felt no regret about his choice. He reportedly saw the removal as a natural outcome of years of conflict, disappointment, and broken trust. Those close to the king said he believed he had gone to great lengths to preserve some form of relationship with Harry, even as tensions escalated. However, Harry's continued public criticism of the family and his willingness to profit from private matters eventually exhausted Charles's patience. In his view, Harry had been given many chances and had consistently chosen fame, money, and public sympathy over loyalty to his family. Prince William openly supported his father's decision, reinforcing the sense that the break was not temporary but permanent. Through aides, William made it clear that his stance would not change when he eventually became king. He signaled that Harry would have no role in the monarchy and no place within the family structure during his reign. William described the situation as the result of deliberate choices and firmly rejected the idea that the family owed Harry further understanding or support beyond what he had already received. For Harry, being removed from the will felt like the final severing of all remaining ties. Any lingering belief that relations with his father or brother could be repaired was extinguished. Friends said Harry came to accept that continuing to seek reconciliation was emotionally damaging and unrealistic. He concluded that his focus needed to be on building a future with his own family, rather than chasing acceptance from relatives who had clearly closed the door. Meghan stood by Harry during this period and encouraged him to see the moment not only as devastating, but also as freeing. From her perspective, the loss of inheritance symbolized the end of control and leverage the royal family had held over Harry. Without financial ties or expectations, she argued, Harry was finally able to make choices based solely on what was best for himself and their children. To Meghan, the financial cutoff represented independence, not just loss. Still, the practical consequences were significant. Without the security of a future inheritance, Harry and Meghan were forced to rethink their long-term plans. While they had hoped that existing entertainment deals and Harry's memoir would provide lasting financial stability, the absence of a financial safety net created new pressure. They needed to ensure that their income would support their lifestyle and their children for decades to come. That pressure pushed Harry into additional projects he might otherwise have avoided. More books, documentaries, and interviews followed, even as he had previously expressed a desire to move beyond his royal past. Ironically, the need to generate income tied him more tightly to the very royal identity he claimed to want to escape. Each new project reinforced the family's belief that Harry was willing to trade privacy for profit, deepening the divide further. This cycle proved difficult to escape. Financial necessity encouraged Harry to continue discussing royal conflicts, which in turn justified the family's decision to cut him off. The more he spoke, the more entrenched each side became. Breaking free from that pattern seemed almost impossible while his earning power remained linked to his royal story. The situation also carried emotional weight for Harry and Meghan's children. Archie and Lilibet were growing up without a relationship with their grandfather, their uncle, or their cousins. They had no real connection to royal life or to their British heritage, and would inherit neither wealth nor status from Charles. Harry and Meghan faced the challenge of explaining this absence and helping their children understand why they were excluded from the wider family. As the years passed, reconciliation seemed increasingly unlikely. With Charles advancing in age and William firmly committed to exclusion, the rift appeared permanent. Harry was left confronting a future shaped by a gamble that did not pay off, an independent life built at the cost of family, inheritance, and belonging. The leaked documents did more than reveal a legal decision. They exposed the full depth of a loss that could never be undone.